It's crazy how many streetwear brands there are out there today, and more being made every day. And it's understandable because streetwear is the easiest fashion category to get into. But here's the thing. As many brands as there is out there right now and currently being made, a lot of them won't be successful. And one of the main factors for them not being successful is because most of the people creating them don't really understand streetwear. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people never took the time to understand where did streetwear come from? How did it get started? Have you ever heard the term to know your future is to know your past? Well, in order to be successful in what you're doing, you kind of need to know your craft. You need to know the history of it because there's a lot of knowledge in that history that can help you perform better going forward with what you're doing. And a lot of people haven't taken the time to really learn that about streetwear. People just jump into it. So today, I'm going to take you down a little trip and share my knowledge about how streetwear was made and how it got started. Hopefully, this knowledge I give you will help you, out there who never even took the time to learn about streetwear, know about the history and where it got started. So let's talk about it next here on Making the Brand. What's up, everybody? Rob Norman here from Planet Brooklyn Academy, and this is Making the Brand, the series where I give you a little knowledge and insight on how to start a clothing line, and if you already have one, how to make it better. As always, before we start, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date with everything we drop when it drops. So streetwear, the story, how did this happen? Well, first of all, before we get into this, I'm sharing this with you guys because, everywhere I look online, people will tell you about streetwear and tell you about brands, but no one really tells you about the story of how it got started. And I'm telling you this is because I grew up in New York City. And I grew up in the heart of when everything was booming, when urban was starting, when streetwear was born. I was at the heart of this in New York City. So I saw everything happen firsthand. I was at these release parties. I was at the fashion shows. I sat at tables with people when they were coming up with these concepts for many of these brands. So I am a person who can tell you this firsthand. So what I'm telling you is from firsthand knowledge. So I'm sharing this with you because a lot of times, one, you won't find anybody who will tell you this. And two, anyone who will tell you this will normally charge you to just let them talk to you about this. But I'm sharing this with you because I think it's something you should know, and it should be common knowledge to anyone that is in the fashion game of streetwear to know how this whole game got started. And this is why I'm gonna share it with you. Also, I've talked about this a little bit in past videos, so I'm going a little bit more in depth with this. I'm also a college professor. I teach at the Fashion Institute of Technology. So I share a lot of this knowledge with my students too. So this is nothing new. But again, this is an opportunity for me to share some knowledge with you that a lot of people don't share. So let's get started. So streetwear, how did it get started? So in order to answer that question, we need to go back. And we need to go back before streetwear and before urban. Before all that got started, we need to start at the birth of things, hip hop. And when hip hop started, hip hop was pretty much the breeding ground for everything creative. So when you talk about hip hop in the 70s, there were no clothing brands that were catered directly to the urban market. And what people did was they took from things around them and things that they liked. If you look back at a lot of the hip hop artists during the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, groups like Africa Bambaataa, if you look at what they were wearing, a lot of them were wearing stuff that you would not see, rappers wearing today. They're wearing like cowboy boots with leather pants, or some of them wearing, suede jackets with the frills on them, with, spike bracelets. This was stuff that they put together, and it was unique because it was stuff that they liked. And there was no market yet for what people were wearing. Because remember, during this time, Nike wasn't big, Adidas wasn't anything people were really checking for. So people were just wearing whatever they thought was comfortable. and whatever they liked. So people were really being trendsetters during this time. And this is the pioneering age where people were just starting trends and seeing what was really happening. Now, once you move past that era and you get into the 80s, this is where hip hop is really, the golden age of hip hop. This is where everybody's starting. You get all your major groups where you're getting your Salt and Peppers and your Heavy D's and your Public Enemies. These artists were all individuals and they all had their own looks. But you're also talking about a group that came up from having no money to starting having money. So they started spending and buying clothing of things that they always wanted. So this is where you start seeing, the Gucci's and everything coming up. But even during that time, artists weren't buying Gucci outfits. They still wanted things custom made. And this is where you get the famed Dapper Dan. Dapper Dan up in Harlem was making outfits with the Gucci logo, and all rappers were going up there to get their outfits made. So they were tailored to what they liked, and it was amazing. And again, if you're studying this, go look up who Dapper Dan is. He's a very important godfather to streetwear and all rest of urban. But artists were going to get their clothes specially made. People were starting to start their own clothing brands. Even back in the 80s, if you know the group Kid and Play, they had their own clothing line called Foreplay, and they were customizing their own outfits. And this is before, urban was even being born yet. This was just other people putting together their lines and their looks. So what happens is that once we come out of the 80s and we start going into the 90s and hip hop is going strong, it's just getting bigger and bigger. Now you had the birth of our first, first urban brands. We started having our Cross Colors. We started having our FUBUs. We started having our Maurice Malones. We had our Karl Kani, who was at the forefront of all this. So you had these lines that other black designers who were in the market and realized what these artists wanted, because now, hey, I'm a rapper, but I'm not a designer. I want to rap. So they were focused on that. So somebody else realized that, hey, I know what you like because I like your music. I like what you wear. I can design this kind of style for you. And this is the birth of urban fashion. So during this time in the early 90s, this is where you start getting all those brands. Again, brands like Mecca and Nietzsche. Eventually Echo was being born in the mid 90s. So there was a plethora, FUBU. All these brands were being birthed during the 90s. And this is when the trend of urban wear started. And there's tons of lines. PNB Nation, 5001 flavors. Again, please look all these brands up. Look at them and look at their contributions to fashion. They laid the groundwork to what is streetwear today. So again, I recommend you all go and look at these brands. Look them up. School of Hard Knocks. So again, fashion really took a turn during the 90s and it was really blowing up. But at the same time, hip hop was still a huge factor in the fashion game, because again, during this time, there was no Instagram, there was no TikTok. Everything was print magazines and music videos. So everybody started seeing the clothing in the videos, and this is how people would start shopping to buy them. And it was a huge industry. Now, as we get to the end of, the 90s going to the 2000s, this is where we start seeing a switch of things. And this is where you start seeing the influence of hip hop globally outside of the East Coast. Now it's making a heavy presence into the West Coast. And granted, it had been making a heavy presence since the early 90s, but now it's filtering into more than just, the inner cities. It's now reaching out into the suburbs. And once it got into that, this is where you started getting your skaters. We're now listening to hip hop. Because before that, skateboarders, and I was a skateboarder growing up in New York City, skaters in the early 90s and late 80s, what they listened to was really more punk and rock stuff. And you dressed accordingly to that because that was the influence of the skate market. But now, as you get into the late 90s, early 2000s, hip hop is the dominant sound. And with that being said, this is now influencing the surf and skate market. And now you're starting to see more of them taking on the trends of urban. You're starting to see skateboard kids wearing baggier pants. You're starting to see them wear the oversized shirts with the graphic t-shirts, where before it was very surf oriented if it wasn't rock or punk. And in the early 2000s, you saw the birth of LRG come around. You started seeing the hundreds. So these brands were taking a lot of influencing from urban and now using it within the skate market. And it was prevalent in such brands as like Shorty's. If you're familiar with the skateboard company Shorty's, and Chad Muska, who is a legend in skateboarding, but he was heavily influenced by hip hop. And he started to do his own mixtapes and things like that. And Shorty's was a huge skating team, which, had a short-lived career, but was very influential in the skate market, but was heavily, rooted in hip hop. And as we start to see this, you start seeing as the early 2000s, you start to see that skating has now become more prevalent. And again, there's a lot of other factors involved here. You also had, the X Games who helped foster this, along with the hip hop movement, the skate movement. Everything was culminating together, basically a perfect storm. Everything was coming together. So by the time we get to the middle of the 2000s, like 2004, 2005, this is where the market starts to shift. And when the market shifted, this is where the downturn in urban was starting to come in, because now urban brands weren't as big anymore. We were seeing a change. Brands like Academic were now not as big as or popular as they were. Echo was not as popular as it was. And at the same time as it was going down, the rise of LRG became much bigger. The Hundreds, much bigger. And then of course, Crooks and Castles. And once those brands got big, this is the start of streetwear. This is where streetwear was being born. So streetwear was being born out of basically urban dying and streetwear, skate market adopting a lot of the urban markets, imagery and mashing it together. And that's pretty much what urban is. What streetwear is, was a mashup of skate and urban put together. And it became urban. And now, once that happened, and again, as you saw the rise of the other brands, this is when suddenly urban was born. I'm sorry, I keep saying urban. Streetwear was born. Please forgive me because I'm just using a constant stream of thought as I'm telling you this. I'm not even going to edit or anything like this. I'm just sharing my knowledge as I'm thinking about it and just telling it to you. So during this time, this is where urban dies and streetwear is born. And during this birth, we also started seeing a shift in the market too, because now everything is going from baggy to more slim. And this also happened right during that time of streetwear being born, because skaters started changing their clothing styles. And a lot of them on the West Coast, what they started to do was they started wearing girls' jeans. And a brand that I would pin to be the starters of all this was Crew, Krew. If you look them up, you're a denim company, and they kind of was the trendsetters of the skinny jeans, because their skaters who they repped were wearing these jeans that were very skinny. And again, they were girls' jeans that the male skaters were wearing, and Crew created this, skinny jean. And basically that started to trend. So that's where the skinny jean started to come from. And that evolved, of course, into, an entire market following that. But in the transition of all that, also what happened is right during that time of streetwear being born and the skinny jean happening, we all had the trade shows of Magic. And if you've been in the industry long enough, Magic Trade Show is the biggest trade show that happens in Las Vegas. And that's where all the clothing brands come to sell their goods and buyers come to purchase. Now, there is an equivalent version to that used to happen out in San Diego called ASR. And that was for the surf and skate market. And it had been going on for a number of years, and in San Diego and in Long Beach it would happen. And one year during this transitional period of urban and streetwear, evolving, ASR had their show, and right across the street from them, Agenda opened up its first show. And Agenda opened up a small show showing the same time ASR was. Eventually, within a year and a half, ASR would disappear and Agenda would now become the major platform for streetwear and surf. And this is where so many streetwear brands were able to get their launch from. So they were all there because they were using ASR, but ASR again was very based on surf, snowboarding, skating. It really didn't cater to the urban or streetwear market. But once Agenda came in, that all changed. And again, this is towards going into the end of 2000. So coming into 2010, we started seeing the boom of streetwear brands. and also the shift again. And what was shifting is that everybody now, because sneaker culture was becoming so huge, and again, it's not that it wasn't big before, but now you have social media, and now you have Instagram, and you have Twitter, and all that is being used. So now more people got into the sneaker culture, and now you started having brands that were being developed for streetwear, basically, who just base their lines around creating colorways for sneakers. So this became a new, launch in the streetwear culture, that now you have brands that just design based off of sneaker releases. And at the same time, while all this is happening, we're also having the birth of social media. So again, you can see where streetwear started to trend and change. And again, skinny jeans was still happening. Now, as we transition through this, what you'll notice is that as we get later into the 2000s, 10s, and up to now, the transition started happening again, where now we're transitioning from streetwear to what I like to call street luxe, the luxury streetwear brands. And this is where we're headed now. So this has been the evolution, and it leads us up to right where we are now, the evolution of streetwear. So this is how streetwear got started. It started back in the 70s. And in the 70s, it started with hip hop artists wearing what they loved, being influenced by seeing other people and other things, and encompassing that in what they wore. And eventually all of that just snowballed into urban and then streetwear into what we see today. And streetwear will continue to evolve. And where it will go next, we don't know. But this is why I need to tell you guys the history of it, so you understand that when you go back and look at some of these brands that I mentioned, and you look at where they came from and look at how they got started, this knowledge will help you with your brands. Because as you do your brand and you look at what they've done and the tracks that they follow, and you read the books that some of them put out, you'll have a better knowledge of basically where you want to go with your brand. It's basically a roadmap, and you need that map to really be successful. Again, all these streetwear brands that are successful, they at some point have been involved in fashion. They've learned something. They may not have physically gone to a school, but some of them have interned. Some of them have worked at companies. Some of them have had people in their companies who come from fashion, who were their right-hand man or woman, to help them, guide them how to do the brand so they don't make certain mistakes. So don't think that these people in these brands that are successful just was like, hey, I just did this overnight and hey, I blew up. They all somehow had to learn. They learned the history of fashion in general to understand where they were going. And this is what I'm recommending for you guys. And this is the purpose of me making this video, is to give you guys an idea. If I can just give you this knowledge and you guys now go out and look up everything I said and look up those brands, this will help you formulate a better brand, because the brands who were good before, and some of them were ahead of their time, if you could see what they did and they're not around anymore, you could probably pick up from where they left off at. Because again, a lot of them were doing things that weren't even thought of or wasn't trending at that time, but is trending now. And people forgot about it. A lot of these designs that they've done end up going by the wayside. I mean, one brand I loved coming up was Alphanumeric. Alphanumeric was an amazing clothing brand. It was way ahead of its time. And if you guys look up their work and what they were doing, I mean, the stuff they were doing was amazing. And this is stuff that can influence you if you look at them. I hope this was helpful, guys. As always, I try to give you a little knowledge, so please take it, use it. Again, I hope it was insightful and it helps you. As always, if you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section below. And we make new videos every week, twice a week. So stay tuned to the next one. And until next time, peace.